Welcome to section 10.1. Now in 10.1 we're going to focus on meiosis and sexual versus asexual reproduction. But before we get there, we need to understand quite a few things about chromosomes, so that's where we're going to start. So first of all, we're going to use humans as our example species. Other species have different numbers of chromosomes. We're not all going to be identical, but we're going to focus on mammals, vertebrates, specifically humans, but these types of organisms. I don't want you to get the opinion that all things use the same type of life cycle or that all things have the same number of chromosomes, because they don't. But in terms of humans, we have 46 chromosomes. And the way this works is our 46 are not 46 unique chromosomes. What we have is where each parent gives us 23 chromosomes. So your mom gives you 23 via the ovum or egg, and then the father will give you 23 chromosomes via the sperm. Now, each of these 23 chromosomes will be considered one set. And so that idea of a set will be defined as N. So you have a sperm that is 1N. It has one set of 23, at least for humans. If you're a fruit fly, it might be 4. You also have where the ovum is going to have one set of 23. And so when those two sets combine, you now have 46 chromosomes. We would call that idea of having two sets, 2N, being diploid. And this is what pretty much all of our cells in our body are. So you'll see this term somatic cells refers to what are sometimes called body cells. These are just like every cell in your body. Your skin, your liver, your heart, these all have two sets, one from mom, one from dad. We call them diploid because there's two sets, di means two. We also have haploid cells. These will be a relatively small number of cells in our bodies. These will be our sex cells. That's what gametes really means, is it means sex cells. So when we're talking about males or females, they're going to have some ovum. I should say ova for plural, although they only have one really at a time that goes through this process. And then you've got males that produce lots and lots of sperm, each of which will be haploid. But that's the only place in our bodies that we find haploid cells, cells that only have one set of chromosomes. Those would be our gametes, and the reason they have that is because they're going to pair up with another gamete, right? The sperm pairs up with an ovum, and then they'll get back to being diploid. And so this idea of following the number of sets becomes critical. In a normal vertebrate, all of our cells have two sets, one from mom, one from dad. But our sex cells have one set because they're going to meet up with another sex cell to get back to being diploid. Now, when we talk about chromosomes too, we said that you have this similarity in chromosomes, that you get one set from mom and one set from dad. And so within this set, you'll have various chromosomes. We number them based on size. So chromosome 1 will be the biggest, and typically chromosome 23 will be the smallest, kind of. You'll see the 23rd chromosome is actually the sex chromosome, so it's a bit odd, but roll with it, big to small. Now, within this then, you're going to get a chromosome 1, that specific type of chromosome, from mom, and you're going to get a chromosome 1 from dad. Now, these chromosomes are going to be nearly identical. And what I mean by that is they'll be the same length. So you can see that here. When you look at these guys, you'll see they look about the same. We've colored them. They're not actually colored. We've colored them just to indicate that you can think that this top one essentially is from mom, the bottom one from dad. So that's why we're using the colorations of like a bluish purple and like a red. So you'll notice that there's centromere, which is the part that holds the chromosomes together we've talked about before. You'll see that's at the same location. So you've got essentially where it looks the exact same, including the centromere. And these will have the same genes. Now I need to be a little bit clear here. When I say the same genes, I mean it codes for the same characteristics. So in other words, if one has a gene that codes for height, the other chromosome will also have a gene that codes for height. They don't have to code for the same thing for height. So to explain that, one of them could say, I have a gene for height that is tall, and the other could have a gene for height that says short. So they don't have to say the exact same things, but they have to talk about the same topics, if you will. So that's what we mean by the same genes. If one of them has eye color, the other one will also have a gene for eye color, but they don't have to code for the exact same color of eye color. And you'll see once again, one will be from mom, one will be from dad. This is why we have two sets. So one will be from mom's set, one will be from dad's set. Now, this matters because if we look at karyotype, which is typically an image we take during metaphase when we've got these chromosomes sitting around, we can pair them up. And you can see that we can see here, one of these would be essentially from mom, one would be from dad. So these are our homologs. This is also how you can see that we have 46 chromosomes. We've got 23 types, and we've got 2 for each. So if you have a normal human, you will have 46 chromosomes. And you can see they get smaller and smaller as we go until we get to chromosome 22 is the smallest, kind of. And then it gets interesting, we said at the 23rd, because these are what are our sex chromosomes. And so that 23rd set contains either X's or Y's. Now everybody will have at least one X. So you'll see this person has one X, that's the big one. And then they've got one Y, which is pretty much the smallest chromosome on average. So it is a really little guy. So you can see here these two are different. So this is an XY. This will ultimately be a male. When you look over at this particular karyotype, you'll see this one does not have a Y. It has two X's. So this will be XX. This will be female. So karyotypes are very useful for us to diagnose gender of something. We can also diagnose chromosomal abnormalities. So we can see if there's something off where they don't have the right number of chromosomes, or if they have too many of a type of chromosome or too few. You'll notice here in this picture as well, you can kind of tell the centromere location. So it's kind of cool that with these, you can see some of these characteristics of the chromosomes we've been talking about. You can see how it's this condensed DNA that's got this centromere that's this more condensed location anyway. So it's kind of cool that you can see that when you look at these karyotypes. All right, now life cycles, just to make sure we're clear on how things go down for the average human, the average vertebrate. So we exist primarily as diploids, so 2N. So we've got here where we've got these 2N cells, and notice there's a bunch of them. So this individual is going to be multicellular like us. So this would essentially be us, you know, ta-da, person. So this individual got to be an individual by doing a lot of mitosis, because you started off with one cell called a zygote, which occurred when an ovum and a sperm went through fertilization, which means they fused, they attached, they became one cell. That one cell went from being N, right? Because if we look here, we essentially have sperm and we essentially have the ovum, but notice they're each 1N. So when fertilization happens right here, we get back to being a zygote, which is 2N. That zygote does a whole bunch of mitosis, copying to make identical copies to build us, this multicellular diploid organism. But once we reach maturity and start to think about reproduction ourselves, we tend to reproduce sexually. So what we'll do is we will have where some of our cells will be able to go through meiosis. And so those cells will split up to become 4 gametes. Notice, remember the gametes here. So in this case, because I'm male, these would represent the sperm that would be produced. Each of them will be haploid, they'll be 1N. If you're a female, you're going to go through a similar process where you'll produce an ovum. Now, it is a little bit odd for females because while they do produce essentially 4 cells, only one of them is viable. Because if you remember here from hopefully what they've taught you in prior courses, sperm are small, whereas the ovum's large, because the ovum brings kind of all the organelles to the party so that the cell can survive on its own. So when females do this process of meiosis, they'll do it a bit differently, where they kind of keep all the cytoplasm in one cell, so they get one big ovum that's able to kind of do everything, and they produce a bunch of these other guys called polar bodies that are really just shrunken little things that they get a nucleus that's 1N, but not much else. And so those ones normally just get broken down, they get reabsorbed by the body, they don't get to go on and do anything. But that one ovum gets to go on and gets to ultimately potentially go through fertilization to get us back to having a new organism that goes through mitosis to produce its multicellular body that reaches maturity, that goes through meiosis and can reproduce itself. That's the process that we're looking at. You'll notice when I did this kind of zygote to mitosis to person idea, I did it twice because then each of these people will have to go through meiosis to produce the sperm and egg, which can then, so we'd have to do this, we'll do it twice too, just to show it happened twice, to then go through the process of fertilization, which would get us back to zygote, which means we could then, we've made a new person, and they can start the process themselves.